For 11 months, Zara Whitmore's granddaughter had not laughed. Not once. Not the small, private kind that escapes when something catches you off guard, and not the loud, unguarded kind that a 7-year-old should have been producing daily, the way breathing produces breath. She had not laughed at cartoons or at the dog next door who ran in circles every morning or at anything, her grandmother said. And her grandmother had tried everything she knew how to try, which was considerable, because Zara Whitmore was a woman who had built a company from a kitchen table and a borrowed laptop and a refusal to accept the word no, and she had applied that same refusal to every problem she had ever encountered in her 61 years of living. None of it had worked on Bella. Bella was 7 years old and had the particular stillness of a child who has learned that the world can remove things without warning. Her parents had died 8 months apart. First her father, Marcus, in a construction accident when Bella was 5. Then her mother, Zara's only daughter, Kezia, from a grief that had no clinical name, but that the doctors eventually labeled as a cardiac event, because the heart does fail sometimes when it has lost too much too fast. And Kezia had never been the kind of woman who knew how to keep her losses at a careful distance. She had loved Marcus the way you love something you cannot imagine living without, and when she discovered that she was, in fact, being asked to live without him, her body had decided it could not be argued with. Bella had been 6 when her mother died. She had not cried at the funeral. She had sat in the front row in a white dress Zara had bought because Kezia had always dressed her in white, and she had looked at the casket with an expression that Zara would spend months trying to describe to therapists and never quite find the right words for. It was not blankness. It was something more organized than blankness. It was the face of a child who had decided, in some wordless and irrevocable way, that the safest thing she could do was feel as little as possible. The laughing had stopped somewhere in the middle of the second funeral. Zara had noticed it the way you notice the first day of real cold, not all at once, but eventually, undeniably. She had moved Bella into her house in Atlanta, into the room that had been Kezia's, which she had repainted immediately because she understood instinctively that a child should not sleep inside her dead mother's preserved childhood. She had hired a child psychologist within the week, then another, then a grief counselor who specialized in young children, and a play therapist who came on Tuesdays with a bag full of sand and small figurines, and a patience that Zara admired even when it produced no visible results. She had enrolled Bella in a small private school with low enrollment and high attention, and Bella had attended dutifully, speaking when she needed to, answering questions correctly, making no friends, drawing no attention to herself, becoming the kind of child that adults describe as well-behaved, when what they mean is that she has gone somewhere inside herself and closed the door quietly behind her. Zara understood more about that kind of disappearing than she told the therapists. She had been that child once, not after a loss, but after a different kind of erasure. She had grown up in a house where quietness was survival, where being too visible, too loud, too much had consequences. And she had learned early how to take up as little space as possible until she was old enough to leave. And then she had taken up as much space as she wanted, and built a technology company that employed 400 people and donated to causes her younger self would have wept to learn existed. But she had not forgotten what it felt like to be small and silent and unreachable. She was trying to reach Bella from the outside. She knew it. She did not know how else to do it. The morning Priscilla arrived, Zara was on a call with her CFO in the sunroom and missed the knock at the door entirely. The agency had sent 3 people before Priscilla: a retired schoolteacher who was kind but exhausted, a young woman who was clearly uncomfortable with a child who didn't respond to cheerfulness, and a man named something beginning with T who had quit after 4 days and sent a very formal email about it. The 4th housekeeper, the agency had promised, was different. Zara's house manager, a meticulous woman named June, who had been with her for 9 years and had an opinion about everything and was almost always right, had opened the door. Priscilla Abbott was 37 years old and had the kind of face that did not announce itself. She was not beautiful in the way that gets noticed immediately. She was something quieter than that, with attentive eyes and the unhurried quality of someone who had learned that most things reveal themselves if you give them enough time. She carried a single duffel bag. She was wearing clean but worn jeans and a gray cardigan that had been washed so many times it had gone soft. She shook June's hand and looked around the entrance hall once, taking in its height and its art and its expensive, curated stillness, and said nothing about any of it, which was the first thing Zara noticed about her later, when June described the arrival. She did not ask about Bella right away. This was unusual. Everyone who came into the house asked about Bella. Priscilla asked June where the cleaning supplies were kept, and whether there was anything she should know about the kitchen before she started, and then she started. Zara, finishing her call an hour later, walked into the kitchen and found it reorganized in a way that was subtle, but unmistakably better. The counter cleared, the dish rack repositioned, something simmering on the stove that smelled like the chicken soup her own mother had made in a different kitchen, in a different life. She stood in the doorway for a moment, with her phone still in her hand, and then she went looking for June. June said simply, "She seems fine." From June, this was extraordinary praise. Bella encountered Priscilla for the first time that afternoon. She had come downstairs in the way she always moved through the house now, close to the walls, as though taking up space in the center of a room was something she had to earn permission for. She was carrying the stuffed rabbit she had not put down in 11 months, its ears gone soft and one eye replaced with a button that Zara had sewn on at 2 in the morning because she could not sleep and needed to do something with her hands. Priscilla was in the sitting room off the main hall, folding a stack of blankets that had come out of the dryer. She did not look up when Bella stopped in the doorway. She kept folding. The silence between them stretched for a full minute, which is a long time when you are waiting for something to happen. And then Priscilla said, without turning her head, "That rabbit has seen some things." Bella looked down at the rabbit. She looked up at the back of Priscilla's head. She did not speak. Priscilla said, still folding, "Mine was a bear. I called him Monday because I only let myself carry him on Mondays so he'd last longer. Didn't work. He fell apart anyway by the time I was 9. She set the folded blankets on the chair and turned and looked at Bella directly. Not with the careful, hopeful expression that adults always gave her when they thought they were making progress, but with something more like simple acknowledgement. "Here you are. Here I am." "That's fine," she said. "You want a snack? I made something." Bella looked at her for another moment, and then, very slightly, nodded. Priscilla made her toast with butter and honey and set it on the low coffee table in the sunroom rather than the kitchen, because the sunroom had the better light in the afternoon, and Priscilla had already noticed that Bella gravitated toward the window. She did not stay to watch her eat. She went back to what she had been doing. Zara, coming in from the garden, found Bella sitting in the sunroom with a piece of toast in one hand and the rabbit in the other, looking out at the yard, eating voluntarily. At a table that was not the kitchen table, which meant she had moved from her usual orbit. Zara stood in the hallway and felt something that was too fragile to name immediately, but had the general shape of hope. She had been running a company for 23 years. She knew what it looked like when something shifted. What Priscilla did with Bella, she did so quietly that it barely looked like anything at all. She did not arrange activities, or suggest games or position herself as a figure of comfort. She simply moved through the house with Bella in it, and she was consistent, and she was calm, and when Bella appeared in a room, she acknowledged her, without making the acknowledgement the point. Good morning, without expectation of a response. "The window light is nice today," said to no one in particular, but in a room where Bella was standing near the window. "That cardigan is a good color on you," once, in passing, without waiting for a reply. She created around Bella a silence that was not lonely. Zara began to watch her. She told herself she was observing for the practical reasons. She always observed new employees, assessing reliability, character, consistency. She had built her company on the understanding that you could learn more about a person in an unguarded moment than in any interview. And she had arranged her schedule to allow for a certain observation. She had done the same with the other observation. She did it with Priscilla. Housekeepers. She did it with Priscilla. What she did differently with Priscilla, she did not admit to herself for 2 weeks. She took a pair of reading glasses from a hook in the staff hallway and a laminate ID badge from June's desk that said faculties in small letters. And that was technically accurate enough to be defensible. And she spent a portion of several mornings in the east wing near the service corridor, where staff moved between the kitchen and the utility rooms, wearing the reading glasses and carrying a clipboard she had found in the supply closet, pretending to be reviewing something. The house was large enough that a woman with a clipboard and a lanyard could move through the periphery without being noticed. She needed to see who Priscilla was when she did not know the house's owner was in the room. What she found was this. Priscilla ate her lunch standing at the counter, then sitting quickly, as though she had learned not to take up too much time being fed. She called someone on her phone twice a week in the evenings, always going to the back steps to do it, always returning with her jaw set in a particular way that had nothing to do with the call itself, but everything to do with whatever she had to hold back while it was happening. She kept a small notebook in her cardigan pocket and wrote in it briefly each morning. She had a habit of straightening things that were almost but not quite aligned, the kind of small compulsive tidying that comes from having lived in disorder, and learned to counteract it with whatever control you have available. She did not complain, she did not perform, and she talked to Bella the way she talked to everything, as though the response was not the point, as though the words themselves were worth saying regardless of whether they landed anywhere. One afternoon, Zara came around the corner of the upstairs hall and found Priscilla sitting on the floor outside the door to Kezia's old room, reading a paperback, and Bella sitting approximately 4 feet away in the same hall, her back against the wall, the rabbit in her lap, not doing anything visible. They were not together exactly, but they were in the same space by choice. Priscilla did not look up from her book. Bella did not move. The hallway held them both without requiring anything from either of them. Zara retreated. She stood at the end of the hall for a long time, with her clipboard against her chest, and thought, she understands something about what that child needs, that no one I have paid to understand it has been able to figure out. She began to find reasons to be near Priscilla. This was not something she examined directly. Zara Whitmore had not reached 61 by wasting time on emotions she could not immediately categorize and use. She had built her company on clarity, on knowing what she wanted and moving toward it without apology. She had loved her late husband, Bernard, with that same directness, loving him out loud and purposefully for 30 years, until his heart had given out one ordinary Tuesday and taken with it the person who had known her best in the world. She had not let herself love anything that way since. She had not seen the point, but she found herself taking the longer route through the house. She found herself arriving in the kitchen at times when she knew Priscilla would be there. She told herself she was checking in, staying aware, being a responsible employer. She told herself this with decreasing conviction. One evening, she ended up in the back garden, where Priscilla was deadheading the roses along the south fence in the last of the day's light. The garden had been Bernard's. Zara had maintained it after he died the way you maintain something you cannot bring yourself to dismantle, paying people to do what he had done himself on Saturday mornings in old jeans, until Priscilla had arrived and begun doing it herself, without being asked, because she had noticed it needed doing. Zara came out on the pretense of checking whether the back gate latch had been fixed. She stood near the fence. After a moment, Priscilla, without looking up from the roses, said, "You can help if you want. There's another pair of gloves on the hook by the door." Zara said she didn't want to interrupt. Priscilla said, "You're already here." She got the gloves. They worked along the fence in the warm evening, the light going copper and slow around them, and Priscilla said, eventually without preamble. She's going to come back, you know, Bella. Zara said, I'm starting to think she won't. Priscilla clipped a dead bloom and set it in the bucket. She said, she's watching everything. She watches the way kids do when they're deciding if the world is safe enough to come back to. She's not gone. She's waiting. Zara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, what if she decides it isn't? Priscilla looked at her, briefly, directly. She said, then the people who love her keep showing her evidence to the contrary. You keep being here. You keep being safe. You keep being the same person every morning. That's the work. It doesn't look like much from the outside, but it's the most important thing there is. Zara stood with a fistful of dead stems and felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for a very long time. Not the grief exactly. Something adjacent to it. Something about how she had been trying to fix Bella the way she fixed problems at the company, through resources and strategy and the application of expertise, and how none of that was what Bella needed, and how she had known this on some level, and not known what to do with the knowing. She said quietly, I stand outside her room at night, and I don't go in because I don't know what to say. Priscilla said, you don't have to say anything. Priscilla said, you can just knock and tell her you're there, that you're not going anywhere. You'd be surprised how far that goes. They finished the roses as the light went fully away, and Zara went inside feeling something she was not ready to name. She knocked on Bella's door that night. She said, through the door, I'm right here, baby. I'm not going anywhere. She waited. She said, good night. She walked back down the hall. When she reached the turn, she heard something. So small she almost convinced herself she had imagined it. A sound from the other side of the door. Not words. Just presence, acknowledging presence. Breath meeting breath across a closed door. She did not sleep for an hour. It was the best hour she had spent in 11 months. June came to her on a Thursday morning, with the particular quality of careful around her that meant she had something she felt obligated to say. She said, I want to mention something about the arrangement in the East Wing. Zara waited. June said, some of the staff have noticed that you've been spending time in the service areas during hours when it doesn't seem to have an operational purpose. Zara said, I'm reviewing facility flow. June looked at her for 3 full seconds with an expression that communicated, very efficiently, that she had been managing Zara's household for 9 years and knew exactly what facility flow looked like. She said, I think it's worth considering whether Miss Abbott would feel differently about things here if she understood the full picture of who she was working for. Zara said she understood the concern. June left, having said nothing more, which was a skill she had developed specifically for conversations with Zara. Zara continued wearing the reading glasses. The evening Priscilla found out, she had been covering for a staff member who was out sick and had been in the home office organizing files. She had opened a cabinet in the wrong room, looking for a label maker, and found instead a shelf of framed photographs. Business events, awards ceremonies, the kind of documentation that accumulates when a person has spent decades in the public eye. In one, Zara was on a stage accepting something in a blue dress, her name in the caption below. In another, she was shaking hands with a senator, the company logo visible in the background. Priscilla stood in front of that shelf for a moment. Then, she looked at the clipboard hanging near the door, the one that had appeared in the East Wing several mornings over the past weeks, and she looked back at the photographs, and she stood very still in the way that people stand when the pieces of something are arranging themselves into a shape they did not expect. She found Zara in the sunroom at the end of the afternoon. She stood in the doorway. She said, without heat, which was almost worse than heat, I need to ask you something. Zara set down her phone. Priscilla said, the woman in the photos in the office, the one in the blue dress, that's you. Zara said, yes. Priscilla was quiet for a moment. Then she said, and the clipboard, and the reading glasses, and all the times you happened to be somewhere I was working. Zara said, yes. Priscilla said, so you were watching me. Zara said, at first. Priscilla said, and then? Zara did not answer. Priscilla looked at her with the particular stillness of a woman who has held herself together in front of difficult people for a long time and knows exactly how to remain composed while deciding what the difficult thing actually costs her. She said, "You were testing me. While I was working in your home, in good faith, telling you things I wouldn't have said if I'd known who you were conducting some kind of assessment." Zara said, "Yes." Priscilla said, "Then I need you to know that is one of the more unkind things someone has done to me in a professional context, and I have had a few." She walked out. The house held the conversation the way large houses hold things, by absorbing it into its walls and letting it settle. Priscilla did not leave. She came to work the next morning, and the morning after that, and she continued to be exactly who she had been with Bella, which was the same as she had always been. Steady and present, and without agenda. Zara watched this, and felt it as a kind of rebuke that she had earned. She tried to apologize in the kitchen on the second day. Priscilla said, "Mrs. Whitmore, I have work to do," and went back to it. Zara had built a company. She had fired vice presidents. She had testified before a Senate committee with 10 cameras on her and not said a single word she hadn't meant. She had never in her professional life felt as thoroughly handled as she did walking out of her own kitchen. She sat in her study that evening and looked at it clearly, the clipboard, the reading glasses borrowed like a costume from someone else's life, the weeks of proximity she had engineered while Priscilla had operated in good faith. And she saw it for what it was. Not caution, not due diligence, fear. She had not been able to trust anyone who came into this house since Bernard died, since Kezia died, since Bella came to live here and became something so precious and so fragile that the thought of the wrong person near her felt like a threat Zara could not articulate but could not stop feeling. She had surveilled Priscilla, not because she was careful, but because she was afraid. And being afraid had made her dishonest, and the dishonesty had been unkind to someone who had not deserved unkindness. Bella saw some of the tension. Not the content of it, she was 7. But the shape of it, the way adults stop talking when a child enters a room, the shift in the air, the careful distances. She had retreated to her room and been quieter the next morning, sitting closer to the window with the rabbit pressed against her chest. And Zara had felt the old cold fear return, which was what finally made her knock on Priscilla's door that evening. She said, "You don't owe me anything, and what you feel toward me is justified." But she noticed something is wrong, and she's retreating. And I am asking you, not as your employer, I am asking you as her grandmother, please don't let her think she is losing you. Priscilla looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "She is not losing me. I need to be very clear that that child is not a consequence of whatever needs to be worked out between you and me. She is separate from that." She went to Bella's door. She knocked softly and said, "Hey, it's me. Nothing's different. I was going to make that lemon tea you had last week. You want some?" There was a silence. A long one, the kind that holds everything a person has been through before it can let anything out. Then Bella said, "Okay." Her voice was small and slightly hoarse from underuse, and it was the most she had said in response to a direct question in 4 months. Zara was standing at the end of the hall, and she put one hand against the wall to steady herself. The days after that had a different quality, not fixed, because nothing that real fixes, that cleanly or that fast, but different in the way that weather changes when a front finally passes. Not warm yet, but with the particular clarity of air after pressure has shifted. Bella came downstairs on Saturday morning and asked Priscilla if she could help with the eggs. Not in full sentences, just pointed at the bowl and looked at her, and Priscilla said, "Grab that spatula." And Bella grabbed the spatula, and they made eggs together in the kitchen, and Zara sat at the counter with her coffee and her laptop, and pretended to read emails while actually watching her granddaughter hold a spatula and pay attention to something outside herself. Zara stopped with the clipboard. She appeared in the kitchen in the mornings as herself, in her own clothes, with her own name, and the first morning she did this, Bella looked at her for a moment and then sat down at the kitchen table. And Priscilla made 3 portions of everything without commenting on it, and they ate breakfast together for the first time. And the room was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet, thinner, with more air in it. She had a real conversation with Priscilla, not manufactured proximity, not observation from a careful distance, but two people in a room telling each other the truth. She apologized. She did not dress it in explanation or context. She said she had been afraid and that fear had produced dishonesty, and that Priscilla had deserved better from the first day, and that she was sorry. Priscilla listened the way she listened to everything, with her full attention and without giving anything back before she was ready. Then she said, "Can I ask you something?" Zara said yes. Priscilla said, "Was there ever a moment in all those mornings when you thought, I could just go introduce myself?" Zara thought about it. She said, "The first week, several times." Priscilla said, "What stopped you?" Zara said, "I didn't know what I was offering someone worth having." The room was quiet. Priscilla said, "That might be the most honest thing you've said since I've been here." Zara said it probably was. Priscilla looked at her in a way that was measuring and not unkind, and then she said, "Okay." Just that, but in the way that okay sometimes means. We are not finished, but we are continuing. She told Zara about her sister that evening, without making it dramatic, because Priscilla never made things dramatic if she could avoid it. Her sister's name was Davia, and she had been 8 when their parents split up, and the split had done something to her that no one in their family had adequate words for: a closing down, a going quiet, a decision made somewhere below conscious thought to stop expecting things. Priscilla had been 14 and had had no tools and no training, and nothing but stubbornness, and the certainty that her sister was still in there. She had sat with Davia every evening after school. She had not asked her to talk. She had read out loud to her, played cards without requiring Davia to play back, cooked beside her in the kitchen of their grandmother's house, kept the world small enough to be safe until Davia slowly, over months, and then years, began to expand back into it. Davia was 42 now. She lived in Savannah. She had a daughter of her own and a vegetable garden she photographed obsessively and sent to Priscilla in long photo strings every September. She called by Sunday without fail. Zara listened to all of it without speaking. She understood that this was not a story being offered for her benefit. It was simply the truth of why Priscilla moved through the world the way she did, the source of the things she had brought into this house that no professional had been able to replicate. Because it had not come from training. It had come from love, from the particular knowledge of sitting with someone in their quiet and refusing to leave. She said, "You're an extraordinary person." Priscilla said, "I'm just someone who's been there." Zara said, "In my experience, that's the same thing." Priscilla looked at her, and the expression on her face was not quite a smile, but it occupied the space where a smile might be, and Zara felt something shift in her chest that she recognized, distantly, as the beginning of something she had not felt in years. She set it aside. There were more immediate things. Bella drew something in December. She had not drawn anything in 11 months. The therapists had tried. The play therapist with the sand tray had tried. The art materials had sat on the shelf in the therapy room unused, and Zara had stopped even looking at them because it felt like evidence of failure. Then one afternoon, Priscilla had left a box of colored pencils on the kitchen table for no stated reason, just left them there the way she left the window open on warm mornings, because a thing being available is different from a thing being offered, and Bella had sat down at the table and picked one up and begun. Zara had not seen it happening. She had come in after. Priscilla had been doing something at the counter, and Bella had been at the table with a piece of paper in front of her, the colored pencil moving slowly and with concentration. Zara had stood in the doorway for a moment, not wanting to be the thing that stopped it, and Priscilla had looked up and caught her eye, and the look had said, "Don't move. Stay right there." "Let her finish," she finished. She looked at the drawing. She looked up and said to Priscilla, "It's my mom." Priscilla said, "It looks just like her." Bella said, "You didn't know her." Priscilla said, "No, but you drew her like someone who did." Bella looked at the drawing for another moment. Then she held it out, not to Zara, to Priscilla, which was the thing that broke Zara open, quietly and completely, in the doorway of her own kitchen. Priscilla took it with both hands and looked at it carefully. She said, "Can I put this somewhere safe?" Bella said, "You can keep it." Priscilla said, "I'd like that." Zara went down the hall and stood in her study in the dark for several minutes, with her hand pressed to her chest, and let herself feel the full weight of what was happening in this house, to this child, to herself. The way something that had been sealed shut for almost a year was beginning, millimeter by millimeter, to open. January was better. February was better still. Bella started going to school 4 days a week. She had one friend, a girl named Tessa from her class, who asked almost no questions, and had an older brother she reported on with great detail and mild outrage, and Bella found this companionable. She started leaving the rabbit upstairs when she went to school rather than taking it with her, which Zara noticed and did not remark upon, because some things are better witnessed quietly. She still wasn't laughing. Not yet. Zara had a second conversation with Priscilla about her own grief. This happened by accident. That is really just two people circling something long enough that they eventually arrive at it. They were in the garden on a Sunday afternoon, the winter garden, spare and clean and still beautiful the way stripped-back things sometimes are. And Zara said something about Bernard, something small, a memory that had surfaced unprompted, and instead of doing what she usually did with those memories, which was compress them quickly and move on, she let it be there. She said, "He planted these roses. I pay someone to keep them now, and I still can't decide if that's right or wrong." Priscilla said, "Why would it be wrong?" Zara said, "Because he knew what he was doing, and I'm just trying to preserve the result." Priscilla said, "The result is still roses. He'd probably think that was fine." Zara said, "You would have liked him. He had a way of making things simple." Priscilla said, "You make things pretty simple when you're not being a CEO about it." Zara laughed. It surprised her. She could not remember the last time she had laughed without meaning to. She looked at Priscilla, who was crouching by the rose bed with a small trowel, and Priscilla was smiling with her eyes on the soil, not making a production of the moment, just letting it be what it was. Zara thought, "There it is. The thing I have been standing near without being able to say it." She started a foundation in March. She had been thinking about it since the autumn, since Priscilla had told her about Davia, since she had started visiting the grief support programs at the city's community centers, and found them underfunded and overwhelmed and staffed by people who were extraordinary in spite of what they had been given, rather than because of it. She spent 3 Saturdays in a row driving to different centers across the metro area, signing in at the front desk, sitting in on groups for bereaved children, watching what worked and what didn't. What worked looked a lot like what Priscilla had done. Being consistent, being nearby without demand, making things small enough to be safe, and then slowly, carefully expanding them. She called it the Kezia Whitmore Fund. She announced it quietly, in a letter to the community centers she had visited, not a press release, not a news conference. June read the draft and said, without looking up from the page, "She would have been proud of you," which was the most June had ever said about Kezia. Zara had to leave the room. When she told Bella, she showed her the letter and explained what it meant without simplifying it, because Bella was 7, and people had been simplifying things for her for long enough. She said, "I'm going to use some of our money to help kids who have lost people they love, so that other kids get the kind of help that we found." Bella read the letter more slowly than seemed possible for a first grader. Then she said, "Is Priscilla part of it?" Zara said that was actually something she had been wanting to talk to her about. She asked Priscilla to come on as the community program director. She was careful about how she framed it. She said, "I'm not offering this because of anything personal, and I'm not offering it as payment for what you've done for Bella. I'm offering it because what you do is something that cannot be taught from a book and cannot be manufactured, and there are a lot of children in this city who need exactly what you have and can't get it. I want to point you at them." Priscilla sat with it for 3 days. She came back and said, "If I take this, it's because I believe in what it can do. Not because I owe you anything or you owe me anything." Zara said, "That's exactly why I'm asking." Priscilla said, "And I want to build the programs myself. I don't want to execute a vision someone else designed." Zara said, "Then design it." Priscilla said, "Okay." She extended her hand. Zara took it. Neither of them let go immediately, and in the space of that extra moment, something was acknowledged between them that neither had said out loud and both had been aware of for a long time. Priscilla was the first one to speak after, and she said, simply, "Okay then," and that was enough for now, and they both understood that. Spring arrived the way it does in Atlanta, decisively, and all at once, the dogwoods going up overnight, the air turning warm before anyone had quite arranged themselves to expect it. The garden came back. Bella asked, one Saturday morning, if she could help plant something, and Priscilla had said yes, and showed her how to dig the right depth for the bulbs they'd ordered. And they planted a row of sunflowers along the south wall of the garden where the light ran longest in the afternoon. Zara watched from the garden steps with her coffee. June appeared beside her with her own cup and said nothing, which was its own kind of commentary. Bella looked up from the dirt, her hands muddy to the wrists, a smear of it across her cheek. She said, "Nana, come do this part," and pointed at the section she had left. Zara set down her coffee. She got a trowel from the shed. She knelt down next to Bella in the soft spring earth and began. Priscilla was on the other side of Bella, and for a while the three of them worked along the south wall in the warm Saturday morning, not talking much, just being in the same place at the same time, doing the same small purposeful thing. At some point, Bella said, matter-of-factly, to neither of them in particular, "My mom liked yellow flowers." The sentence sat in the air. Priscilla said, "Then we're planting them right." Bella nodded. She pressed a bulb into the hole she'd dug and covered it over carefully with both hands, patting the soil down the way Priscilla had shown her. She sat back on her heels and looked at the row of soft earth with the focused private satisfaction of someone who has just made something. And then, very quietly, she laughed. It was small and surprised, the kind that escapes before a person can decide whether to let it out. She looked at the dirt on her hands and laughed, a real sound, brief and unguarded, and entirely herself. And Zara felt something open in her chest so wide, she had to look away for a moment at the garden, at the new green things coming up, at the sky above the city going a blue so clean. It looked intentional. She did not trust herself to speak. She did not need to. Priscilla glanced at her across the top of Bella's head, and the look between them said everything that needed saying in that moment, which was, "Here. Here is the thing we have been working toward. Here is the girl." That evening, after Bella had gone inside for her bath, trailing muddy footprints through the kitchen in a way that would have bothered Zara 6 months ago, and now felt like something close to sacred, she and Priscilla stayed in the garden until the light went entirely. The fireflies had started early that year. They came up from the grass as the dark settled in, small uncertain lights, and the garden smelled of turned earth and the faint sweetness of something just beginning to grow. Zara said, "I want to tell you something that isn't about the foundation or the programs or Bella or any of the things that gave us a reason to be in the same room." Priscilla was quiet, watching the fireflies. Zara said, "I spent a long time after Bernard died deciding that the version of me that needed someone was a version I couldn't afford anymore. And I was wrong about that. But by the time I understood I was wrong about it, I had also convinced myself it was too late to correct. And then you walked into this house, and you were so exactly yourself, every single day, without apology and without performance. And I watched that for months. And I want to be honest with you, which is something I should have been from the beginning. I am not unaffected by you. I haven't been for a long time. And I think you deserve to know that directly rather than sideways." The garden was very still. Priscilla said, "You know what I thought the moment I saw that photograph in the office?" Zara said no. Priscilla said, "I thought, of course. Of course, the one person in this house who talked to me like I had something worth hearing was the person who wasn't supposed to be talking to me at all. She paused. And then I thought, but she did talk to me like that. She did. And that's not a small thing. Zara said. It's not enough. Priscilla said. No, but it's real. And real is where you start. The proposal happened on a Tuesday in June, which was not a romantic day of the week, and in the kitchen, rather than the garden, which was not a romantic location, and without any planning, which was very unlike Zara, who had planned almost everything in her adult life as a form of self-protection. And it happened because Bella had come home from school and told them in the longest continuous speech she had produced in over a year about a classmate who had announced to the whole class that his parents were getting married again, to each other, after being divorced, and how everyone had said that was impossible, and he had said it wasn't because they loved each other. And love doesn't expire. You just have to notice it's still there. And Bella had thought about this for the whole walk home, and had concluded, with the directness that 7-year-olds are capable of when they have been thinking seriously about something, that she agreed. The kitchen went quiet. Zara looked at Priscilla. Priscilla looked at the counter. Bella looked at both of them with an expression of complete patience, the way children look at adults when they are waiting for the obvious thing to happen. Zara said, Bella, do you think you could give us a... Bella said, I think you should ask her now. I've been waiting a really long time. Priscilla covered her mouth with one hand. Zara said, We've known each other less than a year. Bella said, I know. You're slow. Priscilla laughed, full and real and bright in the kitchen, a sound that had been mostly absent from this house for too long, and Zara looked at her and thought about every morning she had stood at the edge of saying something true and turned away from it. She reached into the drawer beside her, the one she had opened every morning for 3 weeks to look at what was inside it, and then closed again without acting. She took out a ring her mother had given her, the only thing of value her mother had owned, a narrow gold band with a small dark stone that had sat in that drawer since November when June, who knew everything, had quietly said, You might want to have that accessible. She held it in her palm and looked at Priscilla and said, You did not walk into this house to save anyone. You walked in to work, and somewhere in the middle of all of that, you saved my granddaughter, and you saved this house, and whether you know it or not, you saved me. I am not asking you to take anything on, because you don't need anything I can offer. I am asking because you are the most real person I have encountered in 20 years, and I would like to be honest with you for the rest of my life, however that looks. Will you marry me? Priscilla looked at the ring for a long moment. Bella said, from behind the kitchen counter where she had very obviously not left, Please say yes. Priscilla looked at Bella, then at Zara, then she said yes, and Zara put the ring on her finger, and Bella launched herself across the kitchen at both of them, muddy shoes and all, and the 3 of them stood in the kitchen in the June afternoon light. And the garden outside was full of growing things, and the sunflowers they had planted were already coming up along the south wall. Later, when Bella had finally been convinced to go to bed, and the house was quiet in the good way it had, slowly, over months, become quiet, Priscilla said, She's going to be okay, you know, Bella. Zara said, I know. I think I finally know that. Priscilla said, Good. They sat together on the back steps for a while longer, in the warm Atlanta night, the fireflies still going in the garden, the city quiet beyond the fence. The house behind them was lit in the way houses are lit when they are lived in, warmly and imperfectly, one window dim, one lamp left on in a hallway. The kitchen light still burning the way it does in houses where people have recently been fed. Bella had left the stuffed rabbit on the kitchen table when she went upstairs. Zara had noticed and had not said anything, because some things you just witness. Some people walk into your life not with answers but with presence. They do not fix what is broken. They sit beside it, consistently and without demand, until the broken thing remembers that it is also still alive, still capable of growing, still capable of turning, however slowly, toward the light.